Thank you for coming. Thank you, Fabio, for being here. I would have Berzait and Muatin welcome you. I'm looking forward to hear your talk. Let me introduce Fabio Mugwani. He's a professor in Siena University. He's professor of European ethnology, anthropology of performance, and history of tradition. The title of his presentation is Living in Heritage, Everyday Life, Tradition and Heritage Policies in Italy. So the platform is yours, and you have 30 to 45 minutes, and then we open the discussion for...
Yeah, I'm very grateful for Rami and for having welcomed us as a group visit from the University of Siena, visiting several universities in Palestine. And I'm particularly glad to be here because, as far as we have been told this morning, Birzeit is one amongst the most open and internationally oriented universities. That means that it might happen also that the suggestion or the contribution that I plan to give you will fall on an already well cultivated ground. So if you see that I am losing time and spilling your time presenting concepts that are already familiar for you, just tell me and I will try to go forward. I try to make a mix in presenting, in projecting this lecture. I would try to make a kind of blend between two concepts and two approaches to the discipline that I have been trained in the same university where I teach presently, and the discipline is the cultural anthropology. It's rather known also when there are not trained anthropologists to teach it and to make research, also because the main methodological tools that anthropology put on the table of humanistics, well, and I'm referring to the fieldwork, is not any longer an exclusive on the anthropologist. The ethnography, that means the use of personal experience, of personal bodily, conceptual, emotional experience as the way of knowing differences in culture, differences in world of view, and differences in social structure, is not any longer specific to the anthropologist. Many other areas have been approaching to him and included ethnography in their practice. The closest to anthropology is the sociology, has opened to the qualitative way, and we can count now, generally, as you know, on qualitative sociological research that are quite difficult to discern from the classic anthropological ones. Other disciplines have been recognizing the value and the virtues of this subjective way to knowledge, that is the personal research, the personal ethnographic activity. You are committed to the study of international law and human rights. And the human rights also is a field that can be explored from different aspects. One of them is, of course, the aspect that open perspective, being close to people who is suffering or experiencing human rights restrictions or denials. Of course, ethnography has also spread all over other social-oriented disciplines. Marketing, the science of selling things, have been exploring a kind of ethnography that means shadowing the consumer's behavior so to identify what is more appealing for their final decision and so on. But I will try to get stuck also to the Italian experience. And in Italy, anthropology remained as a kind of new and heretic disciplines. Heretic means that the inclusion of anthropologists within the academy has always been accompanied by a little bit of suspicious, a little bit of prejudice. The most important author of Italian anthropology school is Ernesto De Martino. Ernesto De Martino, who died in 1965, and Ernesto De Martino opened the debate late in 1949 with a brilliant and explosive article where he stated that within the Western culture, humanism, there was a need. The need was to widen the human horizon to the others culture, because the Western culture horizon was too much restricted, was too close, and would left beyond and out of the knowledge so many human experiences that it was not possible to continue on that line. Of course, Ernesto De Martino had in mind not only the far distant cultures. He was not minding on Papua New Guineans. Ernesto De Martino was concerned by how the cultures of the folk, the Italian lower strata population, had remained out of the concept of culture and had fallen out of the, let's say, frame of interest of the academic disciplines. Ernesto De Martino proposed then that European knowledge system should have opened to the barbarization. Barbarian, you know what is barbarian. Barbarian was the label that was assigned to the others. Well, De Martino said we need to pay the price of temporary barbarization, so to gain in the future the possibility of counting on a wider human horizon than before. And only in this way we could feel at home with all the other members of our societies. The criticism that Ernesto De Martino tried to compensate was that opening to the irrationality of other cultures would have made would have weakened the rational fortress that European philosophy, European science, European knowledge have been building through the centuries. And the answer of Ernesto De Martino was very simple. Western societies did not borrow from outside the new barbarian experiences. Western culture and societies produced from there within the barbarian, the worst of the barbarian experiences that are possible. And the examples were two. The concentration camp experiences, where Jews, gypsy, gays, politically militant, and people with handicaps would have been physically erased, and the other was the nuclear weapons choice. So Ernesto De Martino,
How is that? How are they one European and two? Why are they both?
pardon?
So why is the Nazi actions? Why are they perceived to be barbaric?
Because the Nazi were perceived to be barbarian because the Nazi politics was based on the denial of humanity status to part of humanity.
Yeah, but why is this not European?
Pardon?
Why is this not European?
No, it is European.
Why then you define it
De
as-
Martino was just reminding to the European academics that the
notion
barbarian.
that you mentioned, sorry, maybe you mentioned that he defined this as producing barbarism from within.
Yeah.
So what is barbaristic about that?
What is barbaristic about the Nazi philosophy?
In the sense of external.
In the sense of no, in the sense of internal. It was from the inside. The barbarian.
So you're taking the other meaning of barbarian, not foreign, but rather
Yeah.
uncivilized.
If I can.
The question of De Martino was that there was no risk in putting in contact Western philosophy with the irrationality of other cultures, because the worst irrational experiences have been born on the roots of Western philosophy. And
With the
what
assumption that irrational is barbaric.
that was the critical that was advanced toward and against the opening of anthropologists.
If I may interject, I guess what Dr. Muda is referring to is that why the Nazis' actions were called barbaric, not European.
The point is that barbarian, that is a concept born as a label to identify the others from us, was traditionally linked to a lack of civilization. So what barbarians do should have been unacceptable for civilized people, and civilized people were, of course, the Western one.
This is also part of that.
When the when the critics toward the opening of this contact between other cultures under the concept of widening the humanism, when De Martino had to face the critics against his proposal, he reminded to the others that the major risks were not beyond or out of the European history, but the major risks had been born within the European history. And the others should have been encompassed within the so-called wider humanistic horizons.
But I think there is an important information here is that the concept of barbarism is very essential to anthropology at certain, and that's why. And the fact that anthropology is the study of the other, this is another also dimension
Yeah.
that born with the discipline itself.
Anthropology is
Anthropology barbarizing.
Yeah, but in a way, it's
anthropology
used.
barbarizes because the origin of anthropology is strongly connected to the colonialism.
Yes.
It is one of the roots. There is some other roots that are not barbarizing because there is the roots of the humanistic way. What goes back to the Rousseau or to the Montaigne, for instance, they are not roots that would have barbarized the others.
Yeah.
The barbarism of the others will be strongly dominant after the joining of the first anthropological enterprises and the colonialism.
But they're equally.
Let's get stuck on this point.
Yeah.
But I just want to mention that because the other direction is the universalism.
Yeah.
And it's as problematic as the other.
Yeah,
This one.
yeah, but of course, universalism is problematic. Universalism has become problematic when we discovered that universalism was a projection of focused biases considered universal, so overlapping others' perspectives. At the origin of the colonialist anthropologies, there is a quite mechanic interpretation of the otherness. The otherness are there and they are not inside. The otherness are there and they are down, are lower socially positioned, because we are at the top of the possible evolution that human can achieve. In this way, when De Martino says that anthropology would discuss the question of otherness and include the internal others as a contribution to produce a kind of new humanistic horizon, he tries to break the frontier between us as observer, us as conquerors, us as dominant, and the others as destined to be observed, dominated, and conquered. May I go forward?
Sorry for interrupting.
No, but I like that, and it means that we are going to have another. We can also change the plane. This opening to the internal otherness brings in Italy, for instance, to the birth of what is my personal most attended and frequented field of research and of teaching, that is the folklore studies. And folklore studies, it is very linked to the second half of of the topic proposed for today, that is heritage. But it's also very strictly linked to the other concept, to the idea of everyday life. What is folklore and how is folklore born? The name of folklore, the name comes from a kind of lie. The name of folklore appears in a letter that redactor is an English that has a meaning. There is a journal. The journal is the Athenaeum.
In English, it's a known option, but they call it an editor.
Editor, right. There was a journal at the Athenaeum that was published and almost well spread in the England of the mid-19th century. And in the Athenaeum, lots of details on world cultures, on news, on curiosity would happen. This one? Okay. Let's take it. Folklore used to accept lots of reports from the far marginal coins or corners of the England territory, until one of the editor, Walter Soames, decided to give a kind of a special identity to that, and writes a letter under the pseudonym of Ambrose Merton, writes a letter to the Athenaeum telling, why don't you use a special space, a special section for this news that speaks of our peasants, of our shepherds, of our sailors? Why don't we use the good, I'm quoting, why don't you use the good Saxon compound? And the Saxon compound was folklore. It is the knowledge, the knowledge of our folk. This is the birth of the notion of the level of folklore, and from there, the notion of folklore has been identifying the most curious aspect of national tradition or of social traditions. National is important because we are at the mid of the 19th century, and the mid of the 19th century is for Europe the era in which all the national identities and frontiers would have been strengthened and well defined until the present order. Recognizing that the people, the normal people living within the national to-be frontiers would have been important to identify the cultural identity of those future states, was the reason for which, starting from the German and then flowing all over Europe, the folklore schools became important and crucial for the growing of single nationalities and for establishing a kind of cultural heritage as a seed culture for the future nations. Folklore starts its life as a concept and its life as an academic activity and discipline under the flag of this neo-nationalism in Europe. There is barely no nations that was born in this period until the very first decades of the 20th century that had not been interested by growing attention and academic recognition of the importance of folk dance, folk poetry, folk drama, folk dress, folk ways of housing. After the nations have been established, this importance somehow was crystallized, was objectified, and folklore became a discipline oriented to produce museums of traditional ways of being, and on the other hand was a way of approaching these cultural differences within the national landscape as something destined to vanish. Folklore was considered the science of a vanishing tradition, always vanishing tradition. This happened also in Italy. But in Italy, unlike other countries, we experienced 20 years of totalitarian government. From the 1922 until the Second World War, Italy was ruled by the fascist regime, and the fascist regime tried to identify and to strongly identify its worldview, its practices, its value with the idea of being Italian. For 20 years, all the children who were born within our national territories would have been trained to consider that fascism and Italy were the two faces of the same thing. State was fascist and fascism was the state. And in order to make this kind of proposal acceptable and to be considered natural, fascism adopted the folk traditions. Fascism endorsed all the local expression of folklore. This is a crucial experience for us because we experienced as Italians earlier than what happened in Germany. We experienced how folk and people's culture may be appropriated by others, may become a property of government elite, of governmental policies, and somehow Italians discovered that folklorists were not any longer innocent, nor naive. There was not any longer the possibility of considering themselves as purely passionate researchers and collectors of folk poetries, of folk dance or folk dramas and so on, because there was a kind of frame that was absorbing of this contribution. It happened also in Germany. In Germany, it happens in a faster way, and it happened because the researcher of Volkskunde, that was the German translation for folklore, were not Nazi in their intimate feelings, but the Nazi representation of German identity took over all the languages, all the lexicon, all the concept that has been nurturing the Volkskunde school. The two parallel experiences will have two different exits. Italians, lucky for us, Italians had an important experience that we could call sumud. We could call resist. It is called a resistance. And resistance was an active role that the Italian opponents to the regime and to the German occupation carried out until reaching to establish a new statual entity based on democratic principle and defended by a very liberal constitution. German exited from the dramatic fall of the Third Reich without a national resistance. But Germans made, after the Second World War, a deeper work of reflection on their previous experiences. And Germans have been able to denazify the discipline until giving to the Volkskunde a quite new foundations. In Italy, we had a solution that we could say in the Italian way, a solution that remained ambiguous. All the previous folklorists that had been collaborating within the fascism remained in their places. They had not been fired. They had been not obliged to resign. They remained. They just stopped to declare them as a fascist, as they had been. And we will have to wait through the publication of an important book, important not only for Italy, is the Prison Notebook by Antonio Gramsci, that you know, I think, because in this almost 20, no, not almost 20, but in his decennial prison condition, Antonio Gramsci has been elaborating theory almost on every aspect of political and social sciences, and he devoted a special book, a special notebook, to the topic which title was Observation on Folklore. Le osservazioni sul folklore di Gramsci are very simple, but not, are very short, but not simple. And to summarize them, Gramsci defined first folklore as a worldview of subaltern people, and the subaltern people were not generally deprived or marginal people. Subaltern people are all those who belongs to the instrumental strata. So Gramsci was developing his theory on hegemony and subalternity that was a kind of implicit renovation within the Marxist philosophy, the Marxist representation of social conflicts, and gave the possibility to the folklorist to found again the folklore studies based on this new concept. The folklore would not have been any longer the culture of the Italian people, because the Italian people, according to Gramsci, should have been considered in its internal divisions, because the higher classes of Italian nations did not share the same culture of the lower classes. So with Gramsci, we abandon the idea of folklore as something romantic, nationalistic, and thanks to Gramsci, we can start a school that will grow as an early critical school of cultural aspects. This is why we can say that everyday life come into the concept of folklore, because considered in this, under this perspective, there were not any longer the top oral poetry to be interesting for the scholars or to be considered valid for the knowledge processes, but those experiences, those practices so different should have been included into the worldview of those people and of those local communities. There is a concept that Gramsci has been elaborating, and the concept is that of common sense. Common sense as practical philosophy. Common sense as the summary of very different scattered processes of communication that lower classes people would have been elaborating, so to give answers to needs, to questions, to possibility of survival, and opening the range of interesting things to the common sense meant that the everyday of people entered into the frame, into the focus of the social scholars. Every day is nowadays a kind of topic that anthropologists share with lots of other disciplines. But it is also it's also easy to find it at the core book that opened the seasons of modern anthropology. In Italy, but generally in international level, we tend to identify the birth of the modern anthropology out from the evolutionist or diffusionist perspectives. There is a concept, the idea that modern anthropology starts with Bronislaw Malinowski's research in the Trobriand Islands, when Malinowski was confined during the First World War. I don't know if the book is Argonauts of Western Pacific. I don't know if it's a book that's familiar. Pardon?
It's not very popular.
Very popular.
No.
Bronislaw Malinowski was a Polish scholar. As a Polish, he was Austrian citizens, and he was training. He was making his training in England. And when the First World War was declared, he was an Austrian citizen in an enemy land. So he was making his research in the Trobriand Island that are in the Melanesia, so they are in the other hemisphere, but they formally belong to the England. So the option that was offered to Malinowski was to go back to England, to be to be closed in a kind of camp for foreign people, or to stay in the Trobriand, far distant from all the war scene. And of course, he opted for remaining there, and he made in the Trobriand Island the research on under what we say the holistic approach that brought to the book, The Argonauts of Western Pacific. It has been published in 1922, and since then it has been working as a kind of model for the anthropological monographs. In the introduction to his seminal book, Bronislaw Malinowski identifies the mission of an ethnographer as the mission of one who has to put together a kind of image of the social systems as if they were a person. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor. There is no biological determinism in Malinowski. He uses biological images as a metaphor for. And the biological imagine is that a person is made of bones, and the bones of the person would have been all the data that the anthropologists can collect on the once on the field, all the map that can produce. But the person needs also to be implemented with the flesh. And the flesh is made by the imponderabilia of the daily life. Is only living close to the person, is only living, paying attention to the routine activities that anthropology could have been understood and represented and interpreted the societies and the culture that they had determined to study. So when we discover everyday life as a new possible topic, in some cases we could say that it was already in the anthropological toolkits, because only spending their life as a laboratory and paying attention to the other's life, it would have been possible to overcome the simple descriptivist level. Everyday life will come again as a topic in the sociology and in anthropology. I had planned to present you a kind of array of authors that resulted crucial for understanding the everyday life, and I would rely mostly on the French tradition. In the French tradition, where leaving apart Henri Lefebvre, the Marxist scholar that opened the field of the everyday life as a way of constructing space. In the time closer to us, there is another author which is that you must have been familiar with, is Pierre Bourdieu, who has been a kind of theorist of crossing borders between disciplines. Pierre Bourdieu is born as a sociologist, but his first studies will be classic ethnographers. He will be studying the Kabila societies in the north coast of Africa. And when Pierre Bourdieu has been presenting himself in his self-autobiography, he presented himself as a philosopher and as ethnographer, as a sociologist. In 1979, Pierre Bourdieu what's the time now?
Sono le 2.
In 1979, Pierre Bourdieu published a book, a quite important book, that is The Distinction. If I am quoting things that are already known, I can go. In The Distinction, Pierre Bourdieu will break several concepts. He starts from a Marxist point of view. He starts from the Marxist reading of societies and culture, but he takes the distances from the importance, for instance, of the concept of class. Classes, social classes, are not existing objectively, as some orthodox Marxist tradition would have been proposing, but classes are the result of the practical life, are the result of social interaction, and societies should be seen not as a kind of mechanical play between different classes, but societies should better be represented as a space where each one take the position that can afford, taking into account complex capital, the total amount of capital. Capital is like currencies. Capital is what we have in our pockets, but also we have in our mind. And in explaining how this social scheme could be imagined, Pierre Bourdieu will divide two species of cultural: the cultural capital, I mean the capital of what people knows, the capital of knowledge, and the other is what people have in their pocket, the economic capital. This will produce a scheme that I have been preparing for you, but this produced a scheme that you can see now. What's represented inside? What do mean those words? We can start from the top. Fort volume de capital global means a high amount of global capital. In the top of the scheme, the maximum amount of cultural capital and the maximum disponibility availability of economic capital gathers. And what there is there? The practices, what people do, what people love to do, what people choices to do so to be represented in the social scheme as those who hold that position. And what we can read. The first one is piano. This first one is piano. Then antiquaire, antiques. Then concerts. Then opera, the classic opera theater. Then books that speaks of art and explain or criticize art production. Then cocktails. Then bridge. Ski nautic, water ski. What are they? They are things that people within the social space of French society at the end of the 70s were doing. This is a kind of map of everyday activities, of normal, routinary activities, and positioning these single activities within the map, you can detect how people will behave and which kind of people, which kind of class would have been produced by those practices. If we go down, we found salariés agricoles, the rural workers, the construction workers, bal public, public dance. Public dance means every Sunday people could gather to dance and playing traditional music and eating, recognizing the importance of having bread. This is pain, le pain, the importance of the bread, or the frequency of eating potatoes. And when it's possible, when it's possible, the attendance to rugby activities. And also pétanque. Pétanque is the play of balls. In this part of the scheme, we could read the routine activity of the people who would have been taken and occupied the lowest position because of the low quantity of their cultural currency and because of the convergent lack of money. So this is one of the most ambitious representation of how everyday life can enter into within the sociology of contemporary societies. And all this was possible because what is active in the daily routine is not a compulsory, is not a compelling and external power, but what is leading the practice of individuals is an internal structure. And the internal structure, according to Pierre Bourdieu, we receive the level of habitus. Habitus, according to Bourdieu's definition, is a structured and structuring at the same time. Habitus is the result of the external forces that are the social position, that are the position in the economic, in the productive and in the economic structure, but also the power of the traditions, the power of what we know that we can afford to do. And the habitus is effective on the bodies because the bodies are trained by the cultural behaviors and by the social positions. The bodily axis, is the way in which the body represents the social position and the cultural conditions. How people enter in a room, how people wishes to the other, how people greets, how people interact with their state functionaries.
In general?
In general, we do behave, we do carry our body in our social interaction as a way of expressing our position. This is the axis, and the axis is a fundamental tool for the structure, for the habitus structure. Do you want to?
I mean about all these activities, it's about in general, or it's about French experience?
This is the French model, but you can generalize.
Okay, Pierre Bourdieu went
This
in.
is a map
An
of
example,
French,
this is
the
about-
map
No.
of French life. But
Okay.
you can-
They are an example, but it's a very relevant question. Pierre Bourdieu was invited to present his theory in Osaka, or in a Japan town, university, and he wrote in his notes that he offered to Japanese this kind of logic. I am not producing an abstract theory. I am making a kind of theoretical readings of my country, but the only way in which I can express it to you is grounding it on my country. So we can abstract from Pierre Bourdieu's empirical and practical research a general theory, but the general theory itself must go back again in another place, must be again grounded, concretized. And this has been, it was, Pierre Bourdieu itself who proposed this reading, but also Loïc Wacquantre, that is one of his more recognized continuous pupils. And Loïc Wacquantre has regularly remembered that Pierre Bourdieu cannot be used as a kind of rhetorics, but Pierre Bourdieu's contribution, but has always to be grounded, has always to be used in a concrete and actual and phenomenological research experience. A second name is Michel de Certeau. Michel de Certeau was a Jesuit. And Michel de Certeau, as a Jesuit are always right. There is no way of finding difficulty in the Jesuit argumentation. Michel de Certeau is not a Marxist, of course. He took some contribution by Pierre Bourdieu. He was in a dialogical relationship with Michel Foucault's theory of power. And he tried to propose his own, let's say, perspective on the everyday life. In this book that L'Invention du Quotidien has been translated 2 years later, it is 1984, in the practice of everyday life. And this is the summary of the de Certeau's contribution. The Certeau contribution has to do with the mass culture. De Certeau will take into account the massive behaviors. He didn't do an empirical research, but he will try to read the social behaviors that are possibly detected in the French societies and also elsewhere. The basic concept of the Certeau's theory of the ordinary life is that social organization of the works sees some part of the society in the condition of being a consumer, and some part of the society is in the condition of being the producer. He will concentrate on the consumption practices and on the consumer status. And Desertot will start from the concept that the consumer is not a passive way, but is an active role. Every consumer is a user. And to be consuming means also to reuse what is given to us as a merchandise in a different way, in a different and unpredicted way, unpredicted by the producers. It might be also considered as a kind of compassionate theory, a flattering theory, come si dice, flattering subaltern people that don't compare yourself. You are a consumer, but you may be happy on what you have. There is such a tendency in the universal scheme. There is all a school that is born in the United States, and it's called the School of Popular Culture, that would take this kind of direction. Poor people are ignorant, poor people do not know classic music, they only rely on what they have, but they must be content and we must be consider them happy and dignitous as there is nothing of paternalistic in Desertot's approach. Desertot says that if we watch to the everyday behaviors and if we watch to the historic testimonies, we see that in all the power relationships, those who are dominated have the power to reuse and to rephrase the cultural object that they should consume according to the concept of making do. Make do means to distract something. Make do means to reorganize what was meant to have an effect in order to have him or to have it, to have it, this object, to produce different effect than provided.
It's the same as Henry Ribe's concept of free appropriation.
Free appropriation against the simple alienation. Yeah. Why people should rephrase? Because the lower classes people have not the possibility of replacing the producer in their social position and in their condition of power. And the two basic concepts that Desertot will add to that is the binomial between tactics and strategies. Strategy is the government of space. A strategy is what an entity that is empowered about a determinate space can carry out, can promote. Tactics are the answers. Tactics happen on the timeline. Tactics is the response, the active response that those who are not empowered on a space can put in order, can bring to life in order to be less determined by the other, in order to give way to a kind of positive agency, and to obtain temporary advantages or to escape temporarily by the conditions of domination. Desertot has been a very seminal writer for all the French ethnology of the late 80s until recently, when other authors started to be more popular. One of them is the American John Fiske. He could be considered as a representative of the cultural studies, that area that started as an overcoming of socio-literary anthropological boundaries. And John Fiske, in these two books that are barely divided between theoretical questions and examples of readings, John Fiske proposed a view of popular culture that is very sensitive and is indebted with Desertot's approach, even without direct recognition of Desertaux's contribution. What does John Fiske? John Fiske reads the behaviors of people that live within the mass culture and under the proposal of the mass industries. I will give you just one example. The commercial system of Western Europe has been invaded and devastated partly by the big malls. The malls that are the big supermarket. We saw some opening here or recently built here in Ramallah as well. So the big malls are the open places, open spaces where everyone can enter in contact with goods that are not at hand, that is not possible to buy because of their cost. But everyone can touch, everyone can see. And he says, making an example from American teenagers, that even the lowest teenager class enter the malls, enter the women's clubs, put on some garments, watch them in the mirror. Today, certainly, they will take selfies with a too much expensive garment that will be left there when they leave. And what say John Fiske? That the mass behaviors, mass people do not have access, a generalized access to these goods, but they have at least enjoyed the feeling of having it. And they have stolen to the market their image with that jewelry on the earrings or that scarf of cashmere around their shoulders. With John Fiske, the paternalistic and indulgent comprehension is at risk. Some of this risk has been faced and possibly avoided by Daniel Millers, who is the most successful in this moment. He's an antro star. Daniel Miller is regularly invited all over the festival, the anthropological festivals. And Daniel Miller has been producing a tremendous amount of work on the normal activities, from the daily shopping to the relationship with the home material things, with the cars. And the last work of Daniel Miller is on the cell phone, on the Facebook. What is important? What is the role of Facebook? How can an anthropologist work on Facebook? Well, Daniel Miller took the ethnographic step. He went in Trinidad to the state of Trinidad, and he started to read how the people of Trinidad make use of Facebook, and how the Trinidad people use Facebook is not Facebook. Facebook is something that enters in the daily life, but the user of Facebook are engaging a kind of continuous struggling, forcing the previous and previewed uses of this system. And again, also in the case of Daniel Miller, in this quotation that we will go fast through, there is a kind of distancing from the high and abstract theories. He uses quite strong images, identifying Lacan, Deleuze, and Guattari as oppressive concept. I mean, as smoky rhetorics of a theoretical. And he says that we only can learn something if we bring this artistic looking idealized theory, and if we bring it to the mark of the everyday life. The common concept is that we have to deal with the so-called grounded theory. And the grounded theory is something that does not rely on the autonomy of the artistic looking idealized theory, and do not coincide with the simple deterministic and descriptivistic way of writing something about the daily life. There must be what we say the reflexive attitude that brings the theory together with the experience of daily life. Give me some time so I will present the last one. The last one is Hermann Bausinger, and this might be an unknown author. I don't know if you are familiar with him. Hermann Bausinger has been one of the leaders of the Volkskunde renovation, when the Volkskunde denazified their schools in a little place, in a little town, which name is Falkenstein. Hermann Bausinger synthesized the new term for the German specialist of Volkskunde, telling that the Volkskultur should have been, the folklore studies should have been replaced by the study of everyday empirical life, with a goal of understanding and helping the people that we, as ethnographer, enter in touch with to overcome their problems and to overcome their limits to the development and to the growth. Hermann Bausinger will publish in German in 1967 the book that will be translated in English only in 1993. So for lots of years, these treasures of proposal and of concept will remain foreclosed to all the others who do not know the German language. Then it has been translated by Elke Detmer, that was a scholar of the German Volkskunde, and at the same time she was earning her doctoral degree in the Indiana University. And since then, Bausinger has entered into the general spread reading list. And we have discovered him in Italy. And nowadays, we can rely on his seminal examples. Hermann Bausinger has been writing about the telephone communication, has been writing about the laughing. What does it mean to laugh? Why people should get interested in laughing? What does it mean? Folklorists would have only worked on the humoristic storytellings, but Bausinger say we don't have to look for the text, we have to look for the practices. It's important to understand when people laugh and what kind of social interaction starts when there is a common laugh. The most trivial activity, according to Bausinger, is a way of contact, is a way of entrance within the most intimate life of social systems and within the most complex cultural complexes. This should have been the second part of the lecture, and it should have started with a question. Do you recognize that symbol? What does it represent? You are not obliged to know. It is the icon of this one. UNESCO and UNESCO World Heritage Convention. The WHC is the program that UNESCO set starting from the early 70s in order to provide the humanity of an instrument to protect the human cultural heritage. The years that followed the convention saw Italy well positioned in the rank, the first list of cultural items to be recognized as a heritage of humanities for Italy was this one. and this is archaeological remains. They are rocky drawings in a very remote area of the Alpine mountains, and it is a kind of elitarian cultural goods. Few people were aware of this, the incisioni rupestri in Val Camonica. And this is happened in 1979. The years after, in the UNESCO cultural heritage, was not any longer nothing unknown as the drawings on the rock, but there was, UNESCO accepted the Leonardo's frescoes of the Last Supper that is contained in the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan. And since then, we could say that the UNESCO started to recognize the most evident and the most stereotype heritage of Italy. It was the turn of Rome, then it was the turn of Florence, then it was the turn of Pisa, then it was the turn of Venice. The historical and classic grand tour that European elite used to do since the 70s, since the 18th century, have been accepted and have been entered into the UNESCO logics. Until 1980, until 90, when San Gimignano entered into the UNESCO list. And San Gimignano is a tiny village, is quite apart from the Grand Tour tracks. And San Gimignano has been promoted because it is a kind of monument of medieval heritage. The tower that characterize San Gimignano are all originals, and this little village has been promoted as a jewel of Italian medieval heritage. No mention is made in the UNESCO's documents of the fact that San Gimignano remained with as beauty as it is nowadays, because it was cut out from the development under the social and economic process that changes the face of Italy. San Gimignano remained aparted and secluded by the major forces of the changes and the transformation, as well as it happened with Siena. Siena, our town, entered in 1995 in the UNESCO list, and Siena kept his medieval and traditional outlook, because Siena was conquered by Florence back in the 16th century, and since then its story was a kind of blocked. Siena remained beauty and entered into UNESCO because she exited from the historical process in the sense of an active and changing process. Then, again, another spot in the province of Siena, it is Pienza, and Pienza is a utopic town. Pienza is a town that a Sienese nobleman, once elected Pope, Pio II, decided to build in his native village, borrowing the humanistic ideas of architecture. And Pienza is the first practical produce of the humanism that can be visited. Around Pienza, and this is the last entry, but we are already at 4 spots, the last entry is the landscape. The Valdorcia is not a town, is not a monument. Valdorcia is a valley, and Valdorcia was not even this valley, because before to be identified and labeled in this way by the UNESCO's, people do not recognize themselves as Valdorcia inhabitants. There was a river, the little river, Orcia, but the identity of the Valdorcia has been actively produced after the UNESCO recognition. And if we go, but you can do it by yourself, so we don't have to wait for it any longer. if you go to browse in the YouTube channel of UNESCO and you type Val d'Orcia, you will be shown a movie that explains you how this beauty landscape is not natural, but has been built by the hands of the laborers. That landscape is the result of a special social and economic system that has been ruling that land for centuries, that is the sharecropping systems. And at the end of the video, the gentle voice says that having been recognized as a human World Heritage is at least a small reward for these laborers that have been devoted to produce this beauty. This is not a reward. It's a kind of extreme offense, because people who made the landscape of Val d'Orcia were not struggling for producing the beauty. They were struggling for earning the life. There is a content of labor, of fatigues. There is a content of dramatic condition that was inside that perspective, and that could only be understood taking the approach of everyday routine. If we stay to watch, we see, we can be prisoners of the aesthetic gaze, and the aesthetic gaze may produce the worst offenses to the beauty that it aims to celebrate.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I summarize very much, but if there are some questions, I hope to be able to answer.
Okay, so let's open the discussion. If anyone wants to make a comment or ask a question or
I'd like to ask something. What's the relation between folklore and ethnography?
And then
Between the folklore and the ethnography?
the relation is that at the beginning, folklore was the result of cultivated people, mostly men, of course, that could interact with a representative of folk people and ask them, tell me what people seeing in your country, and they took note.
Okay.
It was not ethnography. Ethnography is what is made when he and me share the present time, and he and me share the same life experience. One of us will do that as its own natural, his personal conditions. The others will do that as an experiment. Who does that as an experiment is the ethnographer. The other is the people. But ethnography
You can
is,
say one is representation and the other is presentation.
yeah. The first is representing something that belongs to others and different from you. The second means to present your comprehension of what you may share with someone else.
But can I ask something?
And the last thing, the only thing, if the first recollection of folklore was based on the distance, the ethnography is possible only under the distance, erasing the distance.
That means the objects must have the folklore
My-
statement.
My object, if he is the ethnographer and I am the man that he studies, I am not his object. I am the person with whom he shares his experience, entering in my world, and what he will learn, sharing with me my world, will be taken back to his academic community or to the scientific community under the form of his ethnographical reports.
Yeah.
But he and me share the same history. We are contemporary. We share the same conditions. I am not his object. I am the one with him. He has a kind of interaction, dialoguing ethnography.
So I want to take this last thing to make a comment slash question, I don't know, or enter into a small debate. It's not really a small debate, but we'll make sure it will stay small here. So this difference between presentation and representation, as a matter of fact, if you look at it, it has nothing to do really with the knowledge produced. It has to do with the subjectivity of the producer.
Okay.
And it's a differentiation that, grosso modo, cannot be seen as a scientific differentiation, because if it is scientific, it has to have some objective basis, and the basis here is actually strictly subjective. I read your statement about the equivalence of fascism and folklore in the
2030s.
In the 20s, 30s. I read your statement about how Gramsci sees the common sense as the philosophy of the working class, and that's not how I read. That's not how I read Gramsci, for example.
Yeah.
I think in that sense, Gramsci refers to the working class as the representative of the people, bearing in mind the notion, a la Marx, that eventually the proletariat is the representative of humanity, and not because it's a notion of a universality where there is a human philosophy, but it's very human in its praxis. So it is not limited to the working class and not the non-working class. I am looking at how you avoided all throughout your lecture the division that, for example, Lefebvre has made, but others too, about this idea of looking at the everyday life with contempt, exactly because the everyday life was not made as a commodity, and it was not sellable. You cannot make money out of the everyday as such. And so, within the capitalist framework, it would lose significance, and it takes ages for it to become an object to study and examine, etc. And there are a few other comments, and they all, they are all variable, and they lead into one direction. I think you missed the class analysis. In the sense that, if you look at everyday life, when we were looking at the last part, this notion of the contempt for the labor, and this, I don't know how to call it, the bastos, the kind of the being so happy and fulfilled with the aesthetics of the produce of labor. Just like when you look at the pyramids, nobody, people enjoy the pyramids. Nobody thinks how many slaves were working there and how many millions or hundreds of thousands have died, creating these great monuments, etc. And that's what the UNESCO is actually promoting. Kill people, enslave people in order to transpose history into a commodity that can come into the market and make money and pay fees and create sellable aesthetic values, not aesthetic values in the sense of this. I couldn't see all this sort of notion of critique to how we, whether ethnographically or sociologically or what have you, how are we approaching the questions of the everyday and the aesthetics of everyday life in a manner where the question that I would really be interested in is, what do you want us to do with all this stuff in the coming post-capitalist era, for example? Just to make the question easy.
Yeah. If we could rely on the post-capitalist era, we could make.
If you don't hope for one, there's no need to talk.
Pardon?
If you don't hope for one, there's nothing to do. We're producing knowledge. What, to stay the way we are?
This is a not simply a question, because the hope that there will be a post-capitalist moment era is a hope that must be leading also the contribution that the soil sciences give to their communities. But social scientists also have to give a contribution of deeply reading how the present capitalist way, how the present transformation of merchandise, how the present transformation of relationship between people and power, individuals and societies, has been affected the persons. And this is, I feel at least, we are still in the phase of the reading of how far this transformation has been going, and we are not yet able to exit. The exit from them cannot be found only within the cultural frame, because the exit from them must be rely on a new, De Martino would say, humanistic horizon. We must retake into account what had been, even from the Marxist experience, taken out. We had to rely. Thomas Erikson, for instance, has been working on the fast acceleration of all practices of consumption, and we are consuming the base for our own survival. And the relationship between culture, society, economic systems, and sustainability was hardly present in the traditional cultural analysis. We have to go back to a kind of orthodox Marxist anthropologies as Marvin Harris to have an early indication of how any cultural and social system must be read in relationship with the ways in which energy is drawn from the environment, and how energy and technology enter in making possible life according to cultural frames and according to, and giving birth to social systems. But we are not yet given, unlucky, of a so complex theory that we can rely on. So that's why I don't take a responsibility of indicating which is the exit way. I'm working on folklore and folk tradition, and I consider that my personal, ethical, and intellectual task is to make aware people who see as the UNESCO's exit as a new possibility, and I think that is my task to convince them that it's not a new possibility. It's just another way of being objectified and reduced, mortifying their complexity. From what is given as a wonderful landscape to see, we should grasp, unlike alternatives to the ways in which today's economic system is leading and exploiting and devastating those lands. There was a secret in this system. We have been talking of that with our colleagues since we are visiting Palestine also, because that landscape were not producing waste. It's a debate that we had yesterday. In the sharecropping world, there was no way of producing waste, because my colleague, she's an environmental scientist, she says the concept of waste has nothing to do with nature. The concept of waste is socially, culturally, and politically identified as natural. So when the landscape is celebrated, there is a double notification. From one side, there is the denial of the contribution that people have given to that, but there is also the privation of the forthcoming generations of the contribution of alternative to the present and given process that was hidden and that could be identified and still read in that landscape. I think that we are still in the way of trying to get this acute sensitivity of how the apparently eternal and lasting forever neoliberal turn is changing our most intimate ways of interacting and of establishing relationship with the environment and with the others. this is still a kind of pars destruens. To the pars construens, we are still struggling, and we hope that someone wiser, and maybe there will be not one, but there must be a kind of convergence of several fields of human knowledge in order to give a possible sustainable answer to this present.
Yes.
I will start from what you said last about the cultural heritage, actually, and the UNESCO. And I will try to link them actually to everyday practices and the transformation of everyday practices when you transform, when you accept something as a cultural heritage.
Yeah.
Because in a way, the moment we put something as cultural heritage, as we are trying to get it out or give away its everyday practices. It's like trying to reduce it to something you have to watch. You have to see something beautiful, something in the past, and not in the everyday. And actually accepting something as a cultural heritage, it has a way of, like, there's a transformation in the meaning of what these places meant to start with, and there is a historical crafting of another history.
Yeah.
In a way, and that happens in a lot. So the concept of protection in a new liberal world takes a different form and transformation of these objects of protection, and it gives them different meaning, different function, to the extent that it uses, it becomes something alien from the environment around it. It's like it becomes something different. And we see that not just socially, the social transformation that comes with the cultural heritage, because the moment you introduce a cultural heritage place, you transform the society around it. It becomes touristic, it becomes a different kind of environment, the relation, the meaning of the street, the meaning of the places, how things are linked between each other. It's a lot of transformation. So how can we understand this transformation in the everyday understanding of the cultural heritage, of the heritage as an everyday practice, and the heritage as a denial of the everyday practice as well? You know?
Yeah.
Can I add something?
This is not UNESCO.
This is UNESCO. I see it.
UNESCO's point is to desacralize history in order to make it a commodity. So what they tell you is you make an aesthetic value out of it, but you can sell it.
Yeah.
It becomes a commodity. So it really sends it exactly into the everyday, but in a different form.
But Budal, I have to say, I'm talking about personal experience here, because my village became a world cultural.
Which is the village?
Batir.
Batir.
Yeah, so it became a world, and the transformation is
But you're
amazing.
still in the legal part of the transformation.
But there's
It's not legal, there's nothing
You're
legal.
still not selling tickets.
We are. We, in a way, we are.
So, and you're telling me you're out of the everyday.
It's out of the
Tickets are there.
transformation of the day from a farming land to a touristic land where people.
It's a different everyday.
I'm saying the transformation.
It's another everyday. It's
Yeah,
another
it comes to deny an everyday life to sell another everyday life. I mean, to produce another.
It's a corporate everyday, but an everyday.
But that's the I'm trying to see to what extent this cultural heritage concept, this concept is a transforming concept within the new liberal ideologies, particularly what we're using protection.
There is another.
Preserving.
I'm just like in my mind, Palestine, and I think there's something missing in discussing this cultural heritage and heritage sites and all that debate, which is the political aspect. In Palestine, for example, using this tool and identifying places as heritage is a way of preserving them from not being deconstructed by the colonialism. So there's colonialism always working, settler colonialism was to uproot and to completely erase the whole history and to create a new one. So here, UNESCO, and I guess maybe people who are working in heritage, do work in creating that site, in producing that site, as a cultural heritage and only to be preserved. Take, for example, Jerusalem. Jerusalem, there is a big clash or the big dispute between the Palestinian and the Israeli, considering Jerusalem as a cultural heritage. In that way, preserving that status quo in today's Jerusalem, so it kept the whole history of Jerusalem as an Arab-Palestinian history, not as different other created colonial narrative about that site.
It's about who takes the fees of the tourists.
But then we have nothing with colonialism. Maybe this, from one context to other, it's quite different than, it's to be used as a tool of resistance.
Look, in the creation of Pienza as a World Cultural Heritage Place, there is no conflict because there is no alternative entities opposing to the possibility of promoting Pienza as a cultural heritage. Pienza was just an extremely beautiful little town and almost an extremely weak social economic system. So after the declaration of Pienza as UNESCO site, Pienza has been devastated by the tourism. San Gimignano, the same. San Gimignano, the same. And what you say makes Palestine again as a particular place where things must be read according to the very strict and local frames. I will ask you to follow me with another example that does not come from the World Heritage, which is made of things, of monuments, of stones, of places, and which is the intangible heritage. And Palestinian has, as listed in the intangible cultural heritage, the Hikaya tradition.
Which is not, it's not really Palestinian.
It has nothing to do with Palestinian identity. Hikaya is universal. Il racconto delle fiabe. Il racconto delle fiabe.
But that's because the Israelis took the falafel.
Wait, no, that's maybe even worse. Because when UNESCO accepted Hikaya, as the intangible cultural item representing Palestine, I think that lots of sincere and committed Palestinian ethnographers must have been worked for that. And it has been a kind of diplomatic success because for the first time, early in 2000, much before than other entries would be admitted in the World Cultural Heritage, Palestine was recognized within the UNESCO's area as bearers of an intangible heritage. But the diplomatic ambiguity made possible this recognition, paying the price. Hikaya has been told and described in the UNESCO as a tradition that can survive also in the refugee camp. Hikaya is the Palestinian cultural tradition that can be transmitted by women, through women.
Yes.
And has nothing to do with the land. Has nothing to do with the place where the Hikaya is told. So that is a kind of miracle of diplomatic issue if you explore it from one side, but if you put on the critical eyes and you try to watch it is hidden to that, there is the implicit denial of the right of Palestinian culture to be territorialized. Of course, in making this, everything changes. The women that hopefully continue to tell their stories to their nephews, to their young people, will not be aware of the UNESCO and will continue to tell however they want. But the places must be controlled, but the places must be governed, and the place must be managed as cultural goods. There is, fortunately, there is a growing literature on that. Barbara Kirschenblatt Gimblet, who is a Jewish American writer, wrote about that, about the heritage as a metacultural production. There is nothing different from what is at the beginning. Is the production of the culture that brought to that same process. And others have been following Barbara Kirshenblatt path. There is a wonderful collection of articles on the critical effect of UNESCO. Is Michael Dylan Fraser, Michael Dylan Foster, the editor of the collection. And within that, UNESCO on the Ground is the title. Valdimar Hafstein, a young Icelandic ethnographer, has been producing an essay on protection as dispossession. The protection is nothing but, maybe nothing but, nothing else but a way of dispossession, of appropriating of things that until that a specific moment were at hand for their bearers and producers, and from the heritage onward start to be held by others. And it's again, according to the Hafstein readings, a way in which neoliberalism is governing our relation with our land and with our most intimate feelings.
Land transforms into a venue.
Land, yeah. Land transformed to a venue. And
شفت شو مثال بسيط؟
شوف
مش تلعب من everywhere, إنه venue.
venue.
Everywhere.
No, but they changed also the meaning of it. Like, for example, the hammam now became the Roman hammam. And it's never been a Roman hammam.
the Roman hammam.
Yeah, and so it was like it's never been a Roman. Historically, it cannot be a Roman. But now it's been transformed to that. I don't know what in this way. I know it in a different way. And its uses were very particular and specific.
Yeah, but you know, if it's Roman, it makes.
It's more catchy, yeah. But they first, I mean, that's because of tourism. But also there is changes in the culture. For
But that's
example,
the point. That's the point. Is that Palestine is about tourism. It's, you know, go talk to the Prime Minister, go talk to the World Bank, and go talk to the European coordinator of the peace process. Everybody will be telling you that, you know, you have this. Well, unfortunately, I mean, I did not want to, because the thing was very interesting. I don't want to attack Fabio, but the idea of accepting this notion of social capital is exactly at the core of these transformations, because it's very neoliberal. It's not, so you can make money without production. See the point? You transform things in a manner where the money goes from your pocket to mine without me producing anything. That's the whole notion. And of course, you know, capital is not the money. I mean, you probably are, I'm sure you're familiar with Marx. Capital is not the money, and it's not what is in your pocket, and it's not what is in your mind. Capital is what grows because of the added value. It grows because of the paid labor, of the, what would you call it? And so the fact that you have anything that has value doesn't mean you have capital. I mean, I feel myself very valuable. I am not capital. Yeah, I become capital only if I ask Reem to work for me. I mean, yeah, and that's how it generates. So the neoliberal notion is that you take something and take it around, like the credit system that took the failure of 2008, and you keep reselling something without producing anything, and you keep making money. But the money is coming from somewhere, from the printer of the United States. You know, they keep printing it, but it signifies the lowering of the standards and the life capacity of so many different people who will not be able to buy food eventually. You know, so the critique of the UNESCO should go way beyond, you know, of this approach. Should go way beyond. In Palestine, it is devastating because we have, we have a colonial condition. We have people suffering, and the liberation process has become a neoliberal process of trying to be attractive for resources, making us. So our liberation now, you know, is to maintain the sacred sites in Jerusalem in order to bring in tourists, and our diplomatic successes are exactly not about freeing 10 people from Israeli prisons, but about giving a new name for something which will attract some tourists and some funding. You know, if you read the reports, 3 million tourists came to Bethlehem. No, 3 million tourists came to occupied Bethlehem with Israeli visas, and they spent on average triple the time in West Jerusalem and not in. I mean, that's the story. The real story is completely different than what you hear. Anyways, thank you.
Okay, Fabio, you want to add something? The
No,
last word for you.
I would like to continue, but
No, I
we
mean
should
just-
need
and
weeks
also-
of
yeah,
presence
yeah.
here, and I'm certain that I would need weeks of listening to you.
So you have a rain check. You
Pardon?
choose the semester and come for months, not for weeks.
Huh?
We welcome you.
We
to
welcome
come
you
for
to
a-
have
Yeah,
you
but
for
for the first month, let me listen, because coming and speak is a very difficult position. I come and listen, and then I try to talk.
We will open a dialogue.
Okay, let's agree on that.
Okay, thank you, Fabio, for your
Thank you for being
wonderful
patient.
presentation. Thank you.
Good. Ah,